You might have wondered about the title of this presentation and of this session, but I think governance issues have always been part and parcel of EPIP conferences, and I think it's very important that we don't confine ourselves just to issues of law and economics. I think we need to grasp new developments, and in that respect, the information revolution is associated with new power constellations which need to be adequately conceptualized. So it's my great pleasure to later introduce 3 speakers from very different disciplines and professional backgrounds, and I'm delighted that they were willing to join this conference, and they were coming and they will share their research. As an introduction, I would like to start with some artful and associative pictures. There's no doubt that we are living through a time of profound social change in our communication patterns, in our use of technology, how we relate to each other and the world, and many of these changes are affected by digitization, datafication, and the internet. And the way how we convene, how we meet each other, how we celebrate certain events, how we are with our friends, is something which is very much influenced by those data. And this, for instance, is a picture of all the pictures uploaded on Instagram in 24 hours time. So it's quite a lot. And of course, data all these internet services create an enormous amount of data, and these data have to be stored in large data centers and repositories. And even if you use cloud services, those repositories are not in the sky, but they are stored in real places, such as this Google data center in Georgia. So data, big data, is often called the new oil, the lifeblood, or the gold of the information society. And very often trying to define big data, reference is made to the so-called 3 V's: volume, velocity, and variety of data. And some people also add veracity and variability as defining characteristics. As a definition, we could say that big data is the collection and re-aggregation of large masses of readily available or poorly protected data for secondary analysis, largely in the form of correlation, pattern recognition, and predictive analysis. The Internet of Things, currently under construction, is promising more connectivity of ever smarter digital devices, more convenience, more efficient use of resources, better traffic planning, and many, many other advantages. And big data also triggers, in social science sense, both utopian and dystopian narratives. On the one hand, we talk about a powerful tool for wealth, growth, and progress, and on the other hand, people fear that it might become a troubling manifestation of Big Brother. The revelations by Edward Snowden have alerted many people about invasions of privacy, decreased civil freedoms, and increased state and corporate control. NSA data centers and practices are associated with dragnet practices of mass surveillance, primarily of non-US citizens, with eavesdropping of EU politicians, also with economic espionage. PRISM, the PRISM program leaked by Edward Snowden, revealed that what Bruce Schneier termed the public-private surveillance partnership. Step after step, year after year, one and other platforms, Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, YouTube, Skype, and Apple started to turn over any data that that would reveal certain search terms, and they handed it over to the NSA. Phil Zimmermann has equated it, another source of data is the TV, and he said the TV has a camera and a mic which is turning your living room into North Korea, courtesy to Samsung. This is a very strong and provocative statement, but I think it's important to recall that the Snowden revelations prompted some companies to move to Europe and to call for strict encryption services. Many scholars relate to the metaphor of the panopticon, which means that there's an idea of a total societal and social control by the state. But in contrast, sociologist Zygmunt Bauman has stated that we are moving towards a panopticon society, which doesn't need a centralized control, because everybody is watching everybody, and also thanks to smart devices, the effect is not more individualism, but more social conformity. The thoughts and the revelations by Snowden prompted several reports by the European Parliament, and one of those reports stated that these developments could be profoundly destabilizing for democratic societies, precluding exercise of basic political and human rights. And one of the recommendations in this report was to reduce exposure and to grow a European cloud. The EU has made some important proposals and initiatives in order to strengthen privacy, and one core element of those proposals is the EU General Data Protection Regulation, which is currently in the trilogue process. But the EU also recommended economic regulation with respect to the digital agenda, but also with respect to the antitrust inquiries for or against Google. So in the internet age, new players have emerged. Platforms and data brokers have gained power both as gatekeepers and as economic players. In the words of Eric Schmidt, what gives them power is their ability to grow, specifically their speed to scale, and this makes the people who build, control, and use them powerful too. Many of these companies are located in the Silicon Valley area. According to Richard Barbrook and Andy Cameron, here a special Californian ideology is prevalent, a contradictory mix of technological determinism and libertarian individualism, also sometimes termed dot-com neoliberalism. How does this belief and value system translate to the rest of the world, and how is it being diffused? Is it being diffused by the products themselves, by economic powers, or by other mechanisms? In the last decade, large internet companies have acquired many other firms, and this is an ongoing process. Google, and Google's new name is Alphabet, is dominating the European market even stronger than in the US, with Google as a search engine and Android as a smartphone operating system. Both are crucial for the infrastructure of the internet. And these Silicon Valley giants have gained very impressive numbers of users and large market shares. Many of them have more than 1 billion users. Europe is concerned that data gathering via the Internet of Things might even strengthen those market-dominating companies. Here are some quotes. Günther Oettinger, EU Commissioner, said, "If we do not pay enough attention, we might invest in producing wonderful cars, but those selling the new services for the car would be making the money." And the French economy minister Arnaud Montebourg said, "We don't want to be a digital colony of the US internet giants. What's at stake is our sovereignty itself." And Matthias Döpfner, CEO of Axel Springer Media Company, wrote an open letter to Eric Smith last year, which was titled "Why We Fear Google," and issued concerns whether Google will become a digital superstate, and also concerns about long-term integrity of the digital economy's ecosystem and the whole future of Europe. He stated, "The question of who this data belongs to will be one of the key policy issues of the future." Not only business people are concerned. European citizens' trust in digital environments has sharply decreased, at least according to Eurobarometer results. 2/3 are worried about having no control over the information they provide online. And 6 out of 10 do not trust online business. And 7 out of 10 people are concerned about their information being used for a different purpose from the one collected for. Furthermore, citizens overwhelmingly believe that the protection of personal data should not be confined by national borders. However, rights on and over data are a very complex and difficult issue. The collection, analysis, knowledge, access, and use of those data is sometimes framed in terms of privacy, but also can be framed in terms of ownership. The question is whether there can be any property in data at all, because it challenges traditional concepts of civil law. Data are intangible goods which in many ways match the public good character of information and knowledge, at least with respect to the non-rivalry in use. Concerning questions of access and exclusion, issues of data ownership are strongly associated with power distributions and with asymmetric information. In terms of legal protection, data as such are not regarded as property, but can be protected via trade secrets, copyrights, and other means. For structured databases, a sui generis database right was created by the EU Database Protection Directive, which protects the substantial investment in either the obtaining, verification, or presentation of the contents. Similarly, arguments for ownership and trade in data often rely on return on investment justifications. Personal data are transformed in terms of service, which also contain transfer of ample worldwide license rights to service providers. And they are affected in a manner and offered in a manner which you can reduce to the sentence, take it or leave it. Either you are willing to use the service or you don't get access to it. So it's certainly true that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product being sold, which is a more general saying nowadays. So as people often, without their knowledge, pass over data to those data collecting organizations and data providers. And one example I wanted to show you is a patent recently issued by the USPTO to Facebook, which describes a technology that tracks the way users are connected in a network. Social network contacts are used as a basis for establishing creditworthiness, and this is, in my view, very questionable. Just because some of my friends have bad credit scores doesn't mean that I do as well. So data aggregation and analytics allows for categorization of users, for stratification of users and consumers, and for profiling. The concerns are that there are potentials for discrimination and stigmatization, and also concerns about the individualization of risks in the field of health, employment, but also in the field of insurances. And this might also, in a certain way, undermine general European principles, such as equality in the access to services and also solidarity as a core element of the insurance principle. Wearables, I will skip that. In questions of data ownership, some scholars have proposed individual ownership and commercialization of personal data in terms of micropayments for users to empower the prosumers. Others reject the commodification of personal data and strongly call for public ownership of data against any private appropriation. But what does public ownership mean? Does it mean state ownership or collective ownership? Does it refer to the public domain or to the digital commons? And how can such categories meaningfully be applied? Should data be endowed to an independent third party as a fiduciary trust? Or should we call for the state to have more transparency, oversight, and establish supervision authorities? I think that we should certainly avoid dichotomic concepts and employ more differentiated and nuanced categories. For conceptualizing the conundrum associated with intellectual property in databases and data ownerships, I would also ask you to rediscover 5 categories of Roman law for non-exclusive property as fleshed out by Carol Rose. I don't have the time now to elaborate on that, but you can read it in her paper. Network, as a conclusion, network effects of the internet-based data economy and new business models, which in a certain way trade services for data, create new power inequalities between users, providers, and intermediaries, and call for legal interventions. Replies to the question whether privatization, proprietarization, and commodification of data enables or restricts invention, innovation, and diffusion of information, and how to have a trade-off and balance to be struck for the protection of privacy are very closely tied to the shaping and reshaping of governance models, both in the EU and on a global scale. And such issues need to be addressed in scholarly research and in the EU's digital agenda. And I hope we will today not have ready-made answers, but some more clues how to conceptualize these issues. Okay, so I will now already hand over to our next speaker.
It's very nice. By background, I'm a historian with a strong interest in libraries and archives. So it's very nice being at an intellectual property conference, particularly hearing the presentations by lawyers in the way in which they have a very strong historical background. And that makes me feel at home. I particularly enjoyed Petra Moses' keynote yesterday, which I thought was a wonderful illustration of how intellectual property researchers find historical data which has a wider cultural significance and is more than simply a lab for exploring different models of access. It may seem that since big data is meant to present issues of scale and potential, the 3 V's that Ingrid referred to, that we haven't encountered before, historical perspectives won't be particularly helpful here. But what I want to suggest is that actually historical perspectives offer a great deal in coming to terms with these solutions, but that maybe we need to widen those perspectives beyond immediate precedent and immediate parallels to look at a much broader historical landscape and to reflect that sometimes maybe big data needs big history in order to come to terms with it. Let's go a very long way back to 1086, when William the Conqueror, who'd won the English crown at the Battle of Hastings 20 years previously, gave orders that a detailed survey should be undertaken of his English dominions. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle described how William sent men to every county to inquire who held what land. And the chronicler was horrified by the amount of information that William collected. So very thoroughly, he wrote, did he have the inquiry carried out, that there was not a single hide, not one virgate of land, not even, it is shameful to record it, but it did not seem shameful to him to do it, not even one ox, nor one cow, nor one pig which escaped notice in the survey. Collating all this information required Williams clerks to develop innovative new data processing techniques as they prepared a series of summaries of the data, eventually reducing it to 2 stout volumes. The motives of William in collecting the information are still debated by historians, but the data was immediately put to use in royal courts and tax collection. Within a short period of time, this 11th century experiment in big data had become known as Doomsday Book, the book of the Day of Judgment from which there is no appeal, just as today there can often be no appeal from the algorithms that might be used to set our insurance policy or credit rating. Doomsday Book was the first English public record. Sorry, that hasn't gone on. Where are we? That's it. And it's a forcible reminder that anxieties about government data collection are nothing new. 2015 marks the anniversary of the grant of another celebrated English public document, Magna Carta. King John is remembered as the tyrant forced to grant Magna Carta at Runnymede, but his reign was also important because many of the other series of records recording government business began during his reign. John's reign saw an upsurge in the use of technologies of writing and mathematics in the business of government. One important thread in the Magna Carta story is that it was both a reaction to and at the same time an expression of this growth in new technologies of government. It's intriguing that Tim Berners-Lee and others have called for a Magna Carta for the World Wide Web to address issues of privacy and openness. And there are a number of problems with this that might be worth noting. One, of course, is that Magna Carta was part of the common law system. It hasn't even been accepted by the whole of Britain, and Magna Carta has always had a slightly semi-detached relationship with the Scottish Roman law system. And the other is that granting the embedding of Magna Carta in English law took several centuries to achieve. It was a very gradual process, and it's not clear that these sorts of gradual processes are going to address the sorts of issues that Ingrid has been describing. In considering the issues of governance, office, and openness, ethics, and identity posed by big data, this kind of longue durée approach can, I think, be very helpful. I'm enormously impressed by a study by John Agar, a wonderful book called The Government Machine, A Revolutionary History of the Computer, which describes how the conception of the modern computer was influenced by the type of administrative processes developed by government bureaucracies in the 19th century, which sought to distinguish between high-level analytical policy and more routine mechanical clerical labour. Charles Babbage's work was a sophisticated expression of this 19th century urge to identify and mechanise the routine. Closely linked to this urge to mechanise government was a concern in the wake of the Industrial Revolution and the growth of population to gather as much statistical information as possible about the enormous changes taking place. In a way, data can be seen as an expression of modernity, and I think we can actually see that our current predicaments around big data have roots going right back to the beginning of the 19th century. Another key big data moment was the 1890 United Census, when the huge quantity of data necessitated the use of automatically sorted punch cards to analyse the information. John Agar vividly describes the achievements of this analogue computing and the rise of IBM. His account of the debates surrounding the national registration schemes introduced in Britain in wartime and the anxieties about linking these, for example, to employment or health records illustrate how our current concerns have long antecedents. However, find the button. I think looking at big data concerns in this way does more than simply remind us that there's nothing new under the sun. It's also helpful in clarifying what is distinctive about recent developments and in identifying areas which should be policy priorities. I think the first of these areas is the ubiquity of data. For governments from the 11th to the 20th centuries, data was something guarded and gathered with enormous clerical and administrative effort, which had to be carefully curated and safeguarded. Data like that recorded in Domesday Book or records of land grants was one of the primary assets of pre-modern governments. Only large organisations such as governments or railroad companies had the resources to process this precious data. Indeed, one of the changes that's very evident is the shift in processing power. And perhaps we should be talking more about big processing rather than big data. Data was used in order to govern and was integral to the political compact. Now data is ubiquitous and comparatively cheap to acquire and process. So this framework of trust no longer applies. Moreover, the types of organisations deploying data have changed, as Ingrid illustrated. In particular, it's noticeable that the driving forces behind the development of big data methods have frequently been commercial and retail organisations, not only Google and Amazon, but perhaps more importantly, large insurance, financial and healthcare corporations. This is a contrast to earlier developments, both analogue and digital, where governments have been prominent and private sector involvement has been more limited. The Oxford English Dictionary draws a distinction between the term big data, as applied to the size of data sets, and big data referring to particular computational methods, most notably predictive analytics. Predictive analytics poses very powerful social and cultural challenges, especially as more and more personal data, such as whole genome sequences, become cheaper and more widely available. How far can your body be covered by existing concepts of privacy? And is the likely future path of your health, career and life a matter of purely personal concern? In many ways, it's this idea of prediction which most forcibly challenges many of our most cherished social and cultural assumptions. Predictive policing, an early contact by police with people considered likely to commit crimes, is already being tested in some American cities. Predictivity almost dissolves privacy because it shifts the way in which we look at freedom of choice. It starts to become irrelevant what my music or reading choices are because they can be readily predicted from publicly available data. How we cope as a society in which many of our actions can be predicted is one of the chief challenges of big data. As my colleague Barry Smith from the AHRC's Science and Culture theme has emphasised, the neuroscience surrounding predictivity, the way in which the brain copes with this kind of situation, will become a fundamental area of research. Finally, it's worth noting that generally the most important large data sets, censuses, tax records, have frequently been about people. But as Ingrid has mentioned, increasingly big data will become about things. For example, machine tools now frequently have sensors attached to them which enable the state of the tools to be monitored remotely by the manufacturer. This might encourage the manufacturer to monitor use of their products by clients in ways that would have commercial implications. The monitoring of medical implants will raise even more complex issues. A hint of the kind of complications that these developments might raise was given in the concurrent judgment of Justice Alito in the US Supreme Court in US v. Jones in 2012, which concerned the use of GPS tracking devices by police. Struggling to imagine how the framers of the US Constitution would have viewed such devices, Justice Alito imagines the analogy of a case in which a constable secreted himself somewhere in a coach and remained there for a period of time in order to monitor the movements of the coach's owner. And if what we're trying to do is to work out by analogy with coaches, then I think potentially we're really in trouble. For the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, complaining about Domesday Book, the object of the king's greed were evident, land and animals. Our future anxieties might be very different because our chief concerns may be about objects linked to us in much more distant and indirect ways. Thank you very much.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a pleasure for me to be here and to talk about big data and privacy in the networked world and presenting the perspective from TA, Technology Assessment. For those who are not familiar, what TA does, TA is a policy advice-oriented research endeavor which is working on the interface between technology development and society with the subdomains economy, policy, law, which all are interrelated. Technology is pushing law and policy and vice versa. So there is a tension between the different subsystems in the society, and TA, Technology Assessment, tries to act as a kind of translator, understanding different rationales, different languages, and giving advice to policymakers in different domains. Talking about privacy, I think it's necessary to remind ourselves that it's not only a fundamental right, but it's also and foremost a prerequisite of democratic societies. So it's not just thinking in positive terms, it's a law and you have to obey the law. There are good reasons why this law exists since more than 250 years. So we have to go into the detail more, these very important article of Warren Brandeis in 1890 about the right to be let alone, which defined first the right to privacy, which is actually related to a new technology at that time. It was photography. The wife of Mr. Brandeis was taking a picture of, and she wanted to went to judge against this using of this picture. And the second very important thing is the term of informational self-determination, which was brought into the social science discussion on privacy by the Bundesverfassungsgerichtshof in Germany, which means that you as an individual should have the right to know and to say who is knowing what about you. So it is, you are the one, the individual who decides. But of course we know this is no longer very easy to achieve. So this different kinds of concepts of privacy are challenged by different developments. We heard a lot about already today. It's technological, political and societal developments, and I would like to give you a short overview what the main drivers are in this respect. So we have in the last 30, 40 years, three main drivers, which is going digit from analog, which makes a fundamental change in technological as well as functional issues. The second one is miniaturization. Everything is going smaller and smaller. All of us have much more computational power with our pockets now than NASA had when they started up to the moon. And the third one is networking. These little devices we have with us, we have in our pockets, and they are with the things you already said are interconnected and making decisions on ourselves. So the third one, the fourth one, not mentioned here, but is emerging now with the big data issue, is the algorithm. We have to decide much more and to discuss much more who is deciding what kind of algorithms are making decisions on our lives in the near future. So when we go back to the technological field, we have databases, registers, we have telecommunications, mobile, we have Web 2.0, social network sites, we have ubiquitous computing, RFID, radio frequency identification, and the Internet of Things, and we do have big data. On the other hand, we have more specific applications of these generic technologies. Since 9/11, we have a boom in surveillance technologies. We use a lot of biometry. We use different sensors to judge what's going on around. And with gene diagnostics and gene analysis, we get a new quality of kind of data. And of course, we do have societal trends and external shocks. But what does this mean? In databases and registers, you get specific data. What's your name? How old are you? Things like that. With telecommunication and mobile data, you get communications and mobility profiles. You know what people are doing, where they are, and how they are moving. With websites, you get profiles of interests. What are they interested in? What is their state of affairs? What do they like to do? What could be a chance to interfere into their lives? With Ubiquitous, you have the first thing with the Internet of Things, the interpretative and algorithm oriented ubiquitous data cloud around you. And with big data, already mentioned, we're going predictive and probabilistic. And I think this is one of the most important things. We are used in many of our arguments thinking causality, and we are shifting from causality to probabilistic ideas. And this is with a high degree with uncertainty and unclear impacts for the future concerned. As far as surveillance and security technologies are concerned, we have the identification of individuals in public and private space. And as I said before, with the gene analysis and gene diagnostics, we have a kind of new quality of information because they promise us to know what will happen with us, although everybody who is really into it knows that there is no predictive thing in it. There is only a small part of gene data that can really say what will happen. It's more probabilistic again. And the societal trends are ambivalent. Of course, we know there is more than 1 billion users on Facebook, and they are disclosing information on that. But that does not mean that they have no idea of privacy. They are dividing and differentiating, and we have to see that this kind of different developments are more complex to govern than without this. And of course, the external shocks since 9/11 led to political overreactions as we see it from our point of view. So what is TA doing? We could help to raise awareness on that issue. We could try to interfere into the legal process of adapting privacy laws. But what we try, and what I want to talk about today is about we try to give hints how we could shape this technology in a more privacy-friendly way so that you have the functionality, but you don't have all the more or less negative impacts. So what are the impacts and challenges? The predictability of behavior makes a commodification of people. Individuals become economically usable entities, manageable risk factors. So it's a change in quality how we look at individuals. We already talked about social sorting and scoring. All of us have scores, be it on our own behavior, our own bank accounts, or be it on the bank accounts of friends. There are already examples out there that you get a credit much easier when you open your Facebook account for the bank, because they get information they can't get other ways on you. So they judge you much more, and so you get an easier bank credit account, which is in a way threatening, I think. And for a long-term thinking, I think the mainstreaming or the loss of diversity is a much more a problem for society than these short-term things. Because when you go to a bookstore and you only get books presented which are very similar to those you already bought, your thinking in a way gets narrower. And this is from an economical point of view very interesting because you have a much higher turnover of things in your shop. But if you go to a real local bookshop, you might go through the literature on or the looking for a plan or map for Glasgow, going to this conference, you struggle over the Austrian literature of the 19th century, and you read a book you were not intended to do so. And you don't have this kind of diversity in the digital systems. So this is in the long term, because change is a driver, or diversity and not mainstream behavior is a driver for change, and for this means the social change will in a way degrade and get slower. And this kind of stagnation is a long-term bad impact we see. So what we did so far, this is just the logos of the EU-funded projects in the domain of privacy and security technologies. I cannot go into detail, but the last 7 or 8 years we did quite a lot, and I want to present very shortly, because it is very restricted in time, 3 different approaches how we can deal with the technological and societal challenges I tried to present to you. Privacy for engineers is referring to privacy by design. That is a concept that goes back to Anne Cavoukian in 2009, the Privacy Protection Officer of Ontario in Canada. And this basically means think about privacy from the very beginning. Take it seriously and be aware that it is easier to implement data minimization and all these principles from the very beginning rather than restructuring a system in the very end. And this is a concept that now in the discussion of the data protection regulation already taken up by the European Commission. So I think this is a way we can catch the engineers, because they have their framework, they have to build everything very fast, very easy, and they don't have the time or need to have this second thought. But if we build in privacy as a kind of prerequisite of systems, we can build systems that are functional on the same level, but still privacy friendly. The second approach would be privacy for marketeers, as I called it. We were part of a process, the Europrice project, which is now turned into an enterprise where you can get as an IT service or system provider a certificate that your system is privacy friendly. And this works, you as a provider, product or service provider, invite experts, legal ones and technical ones, who make an evaluation of your system, and this evaluation report is validated by a certification authority and gives you what we think competitive advantage if you have a high quality product which is from external sources evaluated as privacy friendly. And you have, after the seal is granted, to recertificate after 2 years, because IT systems and services are changing quite fast. And the third one is the citizen's perspective, and I would like to conclude with some insights from a project we did. This is surveillance, privacy and security, and this is from 2012 to 2015, and it was set up to explore the trade-off concept. The very simple trade-off: if you like more security, you have to trade some privacy instead of. And we found out that it's not necessarily so, and even citizens, as long as you inform that and they discuss that issue, they don't buy that simple trade-off, because there are other factors who are managing their decisions about acceptability of security-oriented technologies. So what we did, besides desktop research and making a model on what acceptability means, we had in 9 countries citizen summits with 1,700 participants. That means approximately 260 tables with 6 to 8 people discussing issues. a day-long conference for those lay people. We made an information booklet beforehand. We made some films. They all are on YouTube. You can watch the videos, and we gathered qualitative and quantitative data on that. And together we have 3 security-oriented surveillance technologies at stake and under discussion. So we had an electronic voting system, and people, after getting an information, were sitting around the tables discussing the issue and then individually voting in an anonymous way. And the second method we used was the citizen meetings in 5 countries, approximately 26 tables. It was only 3 hours long, so it was only web-based facilitation and not this electronic voting, but a similar thing. What we tried here with the citizen meetings is if we can rescale the big one, the 200, 250 citizen summits to a smaller event. So what comes out? It is very clear that the criteria that the participants of these surprise meetings very clearly said that the public regulatory supervisory body and legislation is necessary. So they are not believing in the market. They say there is a need for European or international supervision and a clear legal framework for security-oriented surveillance technologies. Transparency, information, and accountability is another criterion that raises acceptability seen by the citizens. What they clearly said is they want the state to be in looking for security and not private operators. So this is a public issue and should not be outsourced. Security-oriented technology should not only be effective but also efficient. So no blanket surveillance, which costs a lot of money and is not effective and not efficient at all. Data control, they of course are eager to hear about their rights of access, rectify and delete data, and this must be ensured even in security-oriented technology and surveillance mechanisms. Data minimization is going back to the purpose principle. Data should only be used for the purpose they are gathered for and not brought about to any other use, which is one of the main things in big data, because the paradigm in big data is get everything you have and try to get something out of it. So this is a kind of contradiction, but this is what the participants in this surprise meeting said. The scope of surveillance, I already said. They were very critical about blanket surveillance. They more or less in all the countries involved, participants said surveillance-oriented technologies could help to increase security, but do it in a strict and clear way and say what you are doing, and not just broad blanket surveillance like the data retention last times. Very strongly reinforced was the wish to have a combination of non-technical and technical measures, so not to skip the whole security discussion on technology only, but look at the sources for insecurity and instability and try to go to the roots and do the political job there. And thirdly, privacy by design was incorporated, should be maintained over time, and these procedures should be part of all the systems used in this security domain. So finally, I would like just to round up, the regulation is necessary, so there is a strong need for a supervisory body and a legal framework, and it has to be possible. We still have a lot of problems with resources in the data protection authorities in different countries. There are additional instruments and incentives that could be used. It is privacy by design, the privacy impact assessment, Public procurement plays a very important part of it. If the public institutions buy privacy-friendly systems rather than others, then we have a competitive advantage. And as I said before, citizens don't buy the simple trade-off. And I think what is necessary, even speaking to lawyers, it's think about privacy instead of data protection, because we saw that in Ingrid's PowerPoint, just ticking, I have read this, makes everything legal from a data protection point of view, and still it is infringing our privacy, and that should be discussed. Thank you very much for your attention.
We'll provide a different view, the industrial view more than the privacy view today. As I said, I come from the IP policy unit of the Commission, DG GROW. So I will really short present some current developments and the economic importance of big data. Then I will turn to the digital single market, which has been a strategy which has been recently published, and connected to this with what are the ongoing EU initiatives. And then I will raise some policy challenges or policy questions. Let me start with an example. Like today, when we use on average our smartphones 150 times per day, each time we use our smartphones, we generate data. These data are used by smartphone producer, app producers to, yes, in one way they invade our privacy, on the other hand they also create some further services. So my focus, as I said, will be more on the industrial level. So these big data, their analysis, their process, they create value for consumers, for companies, and also for the public authorities. The exponential growth of this data is also increased by the Internet of Data, or which means the connection of physical objects to the Internet, as already explained before. For instance, your fridge can order your grocery when your milk bottle is empty in the fridge. In the near future, this will be possible. There are some advantages like increased efficiency, maintenance, shortened lead times. Also, the number of sensors from 14 billion of sensors that there are today in grids, cars, houses, they will increase in 15 years to 100 trillion. So this sensor collects information and generates data. This creates some challenges. How can we maximize the benefits from this digital revolution for EU companies and EU consumers, as well as is there any legal certainty? Is the framework fragmented? Are the rules of ownership and access right in place today for these new challenges? This brings me quickly to give you a snapshot of the economic importance of big data. I list here some macroeconomic studies, recent studies. You can see how the big data market and big data analytics will grow is growing already today. For instance, some studies predict that the EU GDP may be increased by 1.9%. Of course, these are a prediction. There are value added. There are studies that they analyze the value added for different sectors. For instance, the healthcare, the fact that big data concerning patients can be analyzed will help, for instance, to avoid unnecessary tests. This can create only in the EU, for instance, 90 billion of savings. There will also be need for labor skills, the so-called e-skills, and this will grow. One study that I found at European level claimed that in the next 5 years there will be 3.75 million of jobs necessary extra. This one brings me then to what we are doing at the European Commission. Last May, the Digital Single Market Strategy has been released, published by the European Commission. I copied here the relevant paragraph which talk about big data. The Digital Single Market Strategy refers to how actions that can be taken to improve the digital economy in Europe, the access to online goods and services for citizens and companies, and the EU digital networks. He has 16 actions which are different purposes, like e-commerce, the reform of copyrights, even parcels, delivery, but it also refers to big data. As you see, one of the main focus is the free flow data, so the free movement of data. What can we do to have this free flow movement of data? We are not referring here to personal data. Also the locational data. Some member states restrict the access to those data for reasons other than security and privacy. So we also look into it. And then we will reassess also the question of ownership, interoperability, usability, access to this data, also public data. I will talk next slide about some initiatives. And also to the clouds, which are an important aspect, and they can create important efficiency and saving, but they also raise some question of trust and or issue whether it's possible not to switch from one cloud to another one, for instance. So this one brings me, even if the strategy has been released just this May, this brings me to some ongoing EU initiative. I just list some of them. We are now basically in the process of gathering information, so with public consultation that will be launched soon with the studies and also with impact assessments. On the free flow data, for instance, we are analyzing now the digital platforms, so how, for instance, Google or Apple Store or all digital platforms that they gather information. And we are trying to, we would like to analyze this business to understand the transparency, how information are gathered, and how is the relation between the supplier of this information and this digital platform, how are the revenue shared also. The same applies for this data and cloud computing, plus there is a question of trust and switching, the possibility to allow switching between one cloud and another one. There is a relative connected issue on big data also on the open access cloud that the GRTD is running, so the possibility to create an open environment for virtual environment for researchers to share their data. And also on data allocation, as I said before, some member states restrict the access to this data and we are looking into it. So a public consultation on these issues will be launched soon. We're also thinking about, we already launched some study and we'll launch further on the economics of big data, on the analytics, how the business model works, how companies benefit from this, which are the challenges in Europe, and what are the legal implications also. There is also a possible study on the contractual landscaping, so to understand what's going on in each member states at this level. Is there best practices or are there practices that limit the cross-border flow of this big data information? There are many initiatives. I just mention another one really quickly. That is the Strategic Policy Forum. That is a forum that has been created last year by the European Commission. It's to discuss with industry, academia, research center, to understand their point of view on digitalization and also on big data. A report has been released a few months ago, and it includes some recommendations also concerning the big data analytics. For instance, on the interoperability, on the data format for the health care system. If the data format is standardized, this helps the analysis of this data. The trust and hence also the privacy is coming back because there is a need for increasing the trust between consumers and, for instance, digital platforms and which collect information, and also with manufacturer and digital platforms, because manufacturers, they somehow fear they will lose the business intelligence of their data. There are other initiatives also on the e-skills. And all these studies are ongoing. As I said, they are quite recent, so some public consultation will be launched next week. This brings me to some policy challenges or questions. And you see I have a question mark here, whether there is no need for areas or for interventions, possible intervention. What we are looking now from our perspective is about the industrial data, so the data created by the machine indirectly. And on the ownership, and it comes with it the exploitation and access of this data. I will give you some example now. Most of these relationships are covered by contractual arrangement and licensing agreements. But we are thinking whether there is a need or not of a legal framework, or EU legal framework, to cover the holes or to provide a general overview. Why? Because there may be market failure, there may be suboptimal situations due to these contractual arrangements. For instance, if an SME wants to have access to the big data of a digital provider, is this possible? Is this easy to obtain? There are also the big data and the Internet of Things. They also change further aspects on the chain of producing information. I give you an example. In the airline sector, there is a sensor inside the engine or the plane, and there is a company who produces the engine, there is a company who produces the plane, and then there is an airline company who uses the plane every day. The data that are provided by the sensor in the engine should be ownership of the first producer or should be shared in the value chain. These are the type of questions we are asking today. A third party, like third-party maintainers of this engine, should be allowed to have access to this information or not. These are information that are relevant for businesses. We also would like to avoid the fragmentation of the single market. We would like to avoid that current use or future use of big data will create some difficulties and limitation in the circulation of this free flow data across Europe. There is a further issue we are also looking into it, is the access by public authorities to data. Make an example, pollution data. Maybe the public authorities wants to have access just for environmental reasons, for policy, to develop policies, but today this doesn't seem to be covered. While there is some directive on the reuse of public data by third parties, which also should be implemented by member states by last month. I don't know how is the situation now. So this raises all these type of questions which are asking now. As I said before, the initiative we are starting is to collect information, to collect evidence, to understand if there is a problem, and then we will move further. This concludes my presentation. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer.